What was the next big catalyst of change? And, Al Gore's movie hadn't come out. Climate change was not a phrase. It was a thermostat setting. It just wasn't a thing. But I decided that just like broadband, that basically the diffusion of broadband internet across the globe had transformed communication, I felt like that making wind and solar, in particular renewables, cheaper and distributed was going to change things as well. Yeah. And that's where I started my journey, my climate journey.
Welcome back to the Ignite podcast. Today, we're delighted to have Andrew Beebe on the program. Andrew is the managing director of Obvious Ventures. He has a background in renewable energy, which is where we met initially, startups, and a passion for woodworking in my notes. What is that, Andrew?
Yeah, I guess we all need a little something to take.
I love that. And so Andrew and I met when I was first in San Francisco. I moved here and I wanted to work in solar, and that's how we got in touch. It was One Block Off the Grid. I think it was like an event. Were you guys a backer of One Block Off the Grid back then?
We were not, but I knew the team well.
Yeah. I think we probably met at like one of these solar drinks.
When there was like 300 people in the industry and you could get them all in that room and everybody was pretty psyched to have free drinks. Yeah, I remember. Yeah.
This was such a crazy experience for me because I moved to San Francisco and wanted to work in solar. I didn't even want to work in tech. I was just purely on a sustainable energy kick. I ran energy policy for state of Hawaii for Sierra Club, passed a bunch of really amazing laws there. And then I just happened to be sharing an office with Instagram in South Park. That was my first job in San Francisco. So that was pretty wild.
Yeah.
But
that
hey,
sounds like a typical San Francisco story, actually.
Yeah. Like, whoa, these guys just got bought for $1 billion? What is that? But yeah, would love to get an intro from you for the audience.
Sure. Look, I've been doing this a while on the energy side. But before that, in the Wayback Machine, I started as an internet entrepreneur, actually in South Park in 1995, probably 10 years before you were there in the shadow of...
I was still in high school.
Instagram. Yeah.
95.
I came out from the East Coast in 95, and it was interesting that something was happening. The world was changing. I was working in Washington at the time, but I knew that this internet thing was happening, and it was about to be a more effective and meaningful catalyst for change than what we were seeing in Washington. And it turned out to be correct. I got out to the West Coast and in South Park with some friends, helped to create an early web development company. And the next 5 years was just a blur of insanity of company building and venture, figuring out what this venture capital thing was, and watching us go from this sort of very mission-driven movement of the internet is something interesting, but you'll never make any money in it, to much more of a business, and then a multitude of businesses, and then the internet impacting every single corner of the global economy. And it was very exciting, but there was a boom and then there was a bust.
Yeah.
And we all, I think, lost our innocence in that process of understanding what it means to go through economic cycles. And I sold our company, Big Step, which we started with some friends and co-founders, and in 2002, and took some time off to think about what would happen next. What was the next big catalyst of change? And, Al Gore's movie hadn't come out. Climate change was not a phrase. It was a thermostat setting. It just wasn't a thing. But I decided that just like broadband, that basically the diffusion of broadband internet across the globe had transformed communication, I felt like that making wind and solar, in particular renewables, cheaper and distributed was going to change things as well. Yeah. And that's where I started my journey, my climate journey, into renewables. And it was catalytic, just like the internet. And it was very much the same vibe. We didn't think we were going to make any money. We just knew it was something that had to happen. It was very passion and mission driven. And now it has really started to permeate every corner of the global economy. I think we're just ramping in that process.
Yeah.
But that excitement means that we have great business opportunities now because of it.
Yeah, and it's something I looked at too when I was in solar, 13, 14 years ago, is I was following the trends, and I think it was Ray Kurzweil that pointed it out to me in one of his talks. Not personally, I don't know Ray that well. I've met him a few times, but he was pointing out that solar's been doubling in installed capacity every 24 months, and every time it doubles, it gets 20% cheaper.
Yeah,
maybe it's 12% cheaper, something
20,
like that.
Yeah.
Is it 20? Yeah. So, and I was like, oh, and he goes, oh, by the way, we're only like 8 doublings away from 100% renewable energy. I was like, really? That's just wild. Maybe you could comment on that because you've been around the industry for a really long time, and what the installed cost per watt was back when you got started and what it is now, and what that means for, like you said, for future opportunities.
Yeah, I think a lot has been written about that axiom of doubling of cumulative capacity, not annualized, but cumulative capacity in anything it turns into a 20% reduction in current cost. And it's often called the learning curve. We used to call it Swanson's law because Dick Swanson talked about it a lot in the beginning of the modern beginning of the solar transformation. And when I started in solar, roughly speaking, like an installed, well, really a solar panel in California was selling at something like $10 a watt. Maybe it was more like $8 a watt. It was insane, right? And
very expensive.
And we started our first company, Energy Innovations, with Bill Gross at Idealab. He and I had this crazy idea that it was going to get to $1 a watt. We really underestimated the ability of that curve to transform cost structures. And there were a couple of catalysts that made that happen, particularly silicon production breakthroughs and the fact that solar became a bigger consumer of silicon than the semiconductor industry. So we didn't have to use the same level of perfection that was needed for semiconductors, so you could have lower cost silicon. But that meant that China and any place where you could do low cost manufacturing more effectively of small widgets effectively, you were going to win. And China ended up winning and beating our cost curve. And so I ended up selling our company to a Chinese multinational, but a China-based company. And we continued to ride that curve down. And that company, Suntech, was started by Shengrong Shi, who's a very well-known and respected PhD solar scientist.
Yeah.
And I remember him telling everyone, I went to it was like a Fortune magazine interview we did together. And he said, we're going to get to $1 a watt. And
it sounded crazy at the time.
Sounded crazy. And then
like, what?
He turned to me when the reporter was gone. He said, I don't really know how we're going to do that. And he was one of the best, production scientists that I knew. So I was a little bit nervous. Lo and behold, in my final year there, I was running global sales, and my team really sold something like $3.5 billion worth of solar around the world. And we were pretty quickly breaking through $1 per watt on the panel basis. Now we all know the story. We're closer to 20 cents a watt, depending on how you measure it. That's extraordinary, like
20
crazy.
20 cents a watt is where it's at right now?
From a module. It can be less when you're buying at scale. But the other incredible thing is that those panels were effectively on a panel basis, something like 12% efficient. Now they're north of 20% efficient. So think about that. Like 2 orders of magnitude reduction in cost and a doubling of area efficiency such that a solar panel is now cheaper. The sheet of glass that's framed and goes on a roof and makes energy magically from the sun is cheaper than a window. So if you buy like a window frame from Marvin or something, that window is going to be more expensive than the solar panel.
That's nuts.
That's just a clear sheet of glass. So we've done some pretty awesome things as an industry, thanks to that curve and thanks to thousands of people around the world collectively focusing their energy on solving a really, really hard problem. And it's a real inspiration. I mean, this happens again and again in the world when people say something is impossible. A whole bunch of smart people focus on it, and we end up collectively finding a solution. And we're certainly seeing that with AI today. I think we're going to see that with other forms of energy generation like fusion and fission and geothermal. So there's a lot.
Quantum computing.
Quantum. Yep. I mean, I think one of my favorite cases of this is electric vehicles. Vaclav Smil, who Bill Gates likes to quote a lot, and who I think is I don't know him. I think he's read a bunch of his stuff. I think he's a very smart person. Pretty famously wrote about how electric vehicles were basically an impossibility. They defied the laws of physics because you couldn't get enough battery density. It was never going to be cost effective. There's really no way to make it work. And as that book was like in its 3rd or 4th printing, this crazy guy, Elon Musk, and JB Straubel and others were just taking off the shelf, D batteries and strapping them together. And they did a bunch of other cool things too, but they were proving, in fact, that with some basic engineering and intelligence and enough focus, you could really transform an industry. By the way, Vaclav, from what I can tell, has never changed his book, never pointed out that, in fact, he got that a little bit wrong. But again and again, I think there are doubters who, stick to old ideas and refuse to believe that the collective creative focus of humanity can't break through these big challenges. And then we do it and we do it and we do it.
That's why I'm such a techno-optimist, right? Because, you and I have lived through this. I mean, you're only slightly older than I am, but I remember an analog era. And then I remember using a computer for the first time. And then I remember using the internet for the first time. So like our entire lives for 40 years has been like one technological unlock after the next. As long as we don't blow ourselves up in World War III, like we have a lot of really amazing things to look forward to. So what is the business opportunity currently in solar look like? Maybe you're looking at this industry now that it's 20 cents cheaper than a window per installed watt. It's basically cheaper than any other energy source, is my understanding.
It's funny. I went from Energy Innovations to SunTech, and then I worked for NextEra for a little bit, one of our largest customers. I joined them to run a distributed generation business. It is such a well-run company, and they were doing really incredible things. I ultimately left to join my partners here at Obvious 9 years ago. They founded the firm 10 years ago. We're coming up on our 10th anniversary.
Oh, so they brought you in. They're like, hey, we closed the fund. We'd like to bring you in now that it's a real thing. And
exactly.
Nice.
They basically said, you can't not take this job. We've done all the hard work. And they were right. And
the fundraising is the hard part.
Never looked back. Very, very, one of my best career decisions amongst a number of them. And I joined up and I said to them, and they said, great, everything there is to know about the solar stuff. Let's go do some deals. And I said, I think that chapter is done. I think we figured it out.
Yeah.
And in venture,
that's why I left the industry, actually.
Yeah. I mean, when
I looked around, I was like, it's already a solved problem. What else can I work on?
Yeah. So
that's literally why
answer.
I left.
Like we didn't. It was not only was it just not that exciting anymore, but in venture, usually the alpha correlates to that level of excitement that people have about something because you may believe something that a lot of the rest of the world doesn't believe. It happens to me
That's
on
where
a
the alpha is.
Daily basis.
You're early, or you're just at the right time.
Yeah.
The rest of the market hasn't figured it out yet, but you figured it out a year or two or three before. I love that insight.
Yeah.
Did you repeat that?
I think there are two intersections. Yeah. So you've probably seen the Gardner hype cycle curve or flow. And in that cycle, there's a peak, there's a pretty quick peak. So you just go to peak hype and like then there's a trough.
Now. Yep.
Yeah, possibly. And then there's a trough of disillusionment where people realize, like it's easier in hindsight to give examples, but autonomous vehicles, right? We were all super hyped.
2018, 2019, like exactly. This is going to, we're all going to be robo-taxis in the next year or two.
Probably. Yeah. I would say like last year we hit the trough of disillusionment where people literally say, oh, we were wrong. It can't be done. And then what happens is lo and behold, the industry develops itself and comes out for this long tail of growth. And I think in venture, there are
plateau of productivity.
Yeah. Yeah. Eventually. Yeah. So I think there's probably 2 points of entry in venture. It's a question I like to ask when I'm interviewing junior team members. Here's the hype cycle. Where should we be investing and why? And it's sort of a trick question because most people will say the far left, as you just described, like the far left is a good place to invest. If you can be way ahead and get in early, it can be helpful. There are financial reasons why it can be really challenging. You can have bragging rights.
Yeah.
I was early.
Well, it depends on your stage of your firm, too. If you're a growth stage writing $30, $50 million checks, or you're a kind of a pre-seed seed writing $1 million to $3 million checks.
What I would say is that in the trough of disillusionment, there's like everything's for sale. Yeah. So you could be a seed stage fund and come into an autonomous vehicle company at that point and look like a hero. You could rescue the company. It could be recapped, or they could be, sort of rebooting, or there's a new startup that's starting in that trough within that category. So I think really that's the best that's the best place, somewhere in that trough.
Yeah.
It's very difficult to call the trough. It's calling the dip and calling the bottom in any kind of market environment is tough. But that's an incredible place to invest, because you're done having
Buying
to
the
ride
dip
through that. You start on the far left and you've got to ride through the trough, and that's scary. You've got to have dry powder. You've got to have capacity.
Might be Web3 right now, actually. Might be in that dip too.
Right. Crypto, a lot of people would say crypto is in that trough and probably coming out right now. And that actually shows in the data from investing. There's a whole bunch of stuff in climate that is going to go through that dip for sure. And the tricky part of the dip is, it's always darkest before the very end.
Right.
Right. Like it's darkest before the dawn. It's also darkest before the very end. And I, some things don't make it out of that dip, but if you can find that spot somewhere in there, I think that's a very productive place to invest.
Yeah.
So in solar, I came into the firm and said, look, I think we figured it out. We don't need to invest in this area anymore. And we really haven't. I've looked at a lot of Perscovites and other like interesting technology. But again, if you ask the question, hey, if we're at 10 cents or 20 cents a watt on a panel, if you make that 0 cents a watt for the panel, how much better do we make everything? There's no longer a 0 to 1 opportunity, because you've still got $1.90 in install cost. If you can make the labor cost 10 cents less, does that really transform things? I don't really think it does. And so we moved on from, I look at the world, the investment world, in a big pie of carbon. Where does all the carbon come from? And a quarter of that is energy generation. And that's great. But that wedge where I spent over a decade of my career is being taken care of now by massive infrastructure investors. It's almost like a yield product, like a next era kind of vector of attack. They love that space in large scale wind, large scale solar. And now they're adding storage to really buff out what that quadrant can deliver in terms of returns.
Yeah.
That is in many ways effectively done. We then moved on to vehicle electrification, which is really the next big wedge. It was also a space 8 years ago that it was very hard for people to squint and see a fully electrified future.
Right.
And we published something called the electrification of everything, which was just a basic stake in the ground saying this is anything with a tailpipe is about to become electrified. It's been a long journey, but I think we continue to be right. That was us investing on the far left side. And a whole bunch of stuff has gone through the trough, and some of it has not made it out of that dip. And then a bunch of it has, huge winners have. And we've had 2 companies go public and one company get sold to BP. And, we've had, I think, really strong outcomes there.
Are you in the FreeWire deal? Did you look at that company?
I know the company. We're not investors. I'm a big fan of that founder, though.
Yeah,
we were in
that deal. I was personally in that deal as an angel.
We were in
they just exited,
Amply, and now we're in Synop, which is an EV fleet management software. We're also in Forum Mobility, which is an electric trucking company, and we're in Lightship, an electric recreational vehicle company.
Nice.
But there's a lot left to be done there. I'm very excited about that. I think what's happened recently, which I think is very exciting, is AI, I believe is part of that next wave of this changes everything. I don't think crypto
and robotics
really was that. Yeah. And robotics, but AI, really autonomous decision-making and autonomous analytics on behalf of humans in software is a really, really transformative concept if executed effectively. Things that can become multi-point agents for us that will take multiple steps on our behalf and come back with answer solutions, creativity. I think that's transformative. So one of the knock-on effects is it's an energy hog. We're going to make it a lot more energy efficient. We're going to have more energy efficient chips, more energy efficient software, essentially more efficient software. But that doesn't matter. It will be the value it provides is so magical that we will then just need more of it. So
there's something called Huang's Law right now that's happening where we are 10xing the compute used to train AI every 6 months. So it's an order of magnitude more compute.
Yeah.
And 100x a year. And so to your point, where's that energy going to come from?
Yeah.
Because if we're 100xing the compute, it doesn't take that long for that to suck up the entire world's energy supply.
Yeah. I have for a long time said, look, we don't need nuclear fission and fusion because wind and solar plus storage is enough. I now take that back. I think I was right for a while. Yeah. I'm definitely no longer correct with that perspective, and I don't hold it anymore, that conviction. What I believe is that wind and solar are extraordinary power sources, and partnered with storage, they can be great, and they can be great off-grid and on-grid. However, we can't deploy them fast enough, not just because of the build-out of a large-scale solar farm, but because of the transmission and distribution. It's a story you know well, but that grid, I call it gridlock, that congestion of the grid is not yet being solved. And so we spent a lot more time here on nuclear fission. We haven't made any investments, but I could certainly see doing so. And I've spent a lot of time on geothermal, which I think is the unsung hero of the next 5 to 10 years. It is, we are not, geothermal is awesome because it's boring, and yet it's very, very effective. It has no
Iceland,
fuel.
Right? Iceland has most of their energy from geothermal.
Iceland is amazing. Indonesia has a lot, which is really exciting because they have a lot of coal too. So this could be a great replacement solution for them. But we, everywhere, has a lot of geothermal. If you go deep enough, obviously the entire planet does. But even at shallower depths, there is geothermal hidden everywhere. It's just hard to find. So I think companies and technologies that can either go deeper, like a Quaise, or find new technology solutions for the shallow stuff like Fervo, or find the stuff in the first place like Zanskar, are all really viable companies to help unlock a massive amount of power in the near term. And that's exciting. I mean, fusion is, of course, exciting. In theory, we could build it anywhere, and eventually we'll be able to deploy it quickly. But that will take 15 years before we're deploying it quickly at best. And fission, while exciting, has siting challenges that we all know well. So
nobody wants a fission reactor in their backyard.
Yeah. And so, luckily we can put data centers in nobody's backyard as well. So we can run fiber lines. And I do think we'll be seeing a lot more fission being deployed. But all of that is to say, Brian, that it's taken me back to my roots of power generation. And interestingly, I think I think what's really happened, or what is about to manifest, is a reality that we have underpriced, and yet our demand is going through the roof. So when you put those two together, I didn't take a lot of econ classes, but the one I took, the 101, really tells you that when that happens, pricing goes up. And I think pricing is going to go up substantially. And I think for those people who are building massive data centers at an unexpectedly high rate, I think we're going to see that it won't be a problem for them. That'll be just fine to an extent.
Yeah, but if they can put the data center in the middle of the Nevada desert somewhere, couldn't they also build the big, hundreds of megawatt scale solar and wind to go along with it?
Yeah, and they've done that, and basically I think all of the big tech companies, at least top 5, have done that in some form or fashion. I would say that a lot of them believe the available sites for that in terms of time are gone, or they've locked them in. So they can build it. It's just going to take 3, 4, 5 years to get the permits and get the land use rights. There's a whole bunch of issues about how they can do that, both on public land, but even on private land as well, because of the amount of area that they have to cover. However, doing a subsurface geothermal, you could do it on 20 acres, and you could build a facility that will give you 24/7 clean power, and you could then giga-scale data center. Yeah.
It's a beautiful thing about business economics, capitalism, is we keep finding new ways, right? To your point, demand goes up, driving a upward pressure in prices. And so innovators, they invent new ways of bringing that price down, basically fulfilling that demand. And we just can constantly do this. It's just such a beautiful system.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the pillars of Obvious Ventures. Here in my notes, I have sustainable systems, healthy living, and people power. Maybe you could speak a little bit to that.
Yeah. Since the founding, I lead our climate practice, but we have always focused on these 3 pillars. We often refer to it as human health, planetary health, and economic health. And we do that because we think that when more and more founders are very mission driven. Founders have been mission driven from the beginning, from Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak to Larry and Sergey and others. I mean, they've all thought about, I think, bringing the world to a better place. But increasingly, I think people are looking for ways where the product is also the one delivering those goods, not just the values of the company. And increasingly, that's led more and more people to how can I affect and impact human health for the better and longevity and happiness? How can I affect economic empowerment for individuals and small businesses in particular? And then how can I ensure that we've got a planet that's thriving, not struggling on a climate level? And that's what those three pillars are. They're meant to be evergreen. Those are really encompassing the biggest industries of the global economy. And I think that it's served us well to have that kind of diversified platform or portfolio approach as a multi-thematic fund. I think they're great specialist funds, but I've talked to specialist funds who are just doing wildfire remediation, companies that are just doing geothermal, people who are only doing certain parts of ocean.
It's tough to run a fund like that, I think. Because you're so pigeonholed into one thing, and then you have so much market risk.
It's very cyclical, and I think people did this in crypto. Some of them very well. Maybe they got lucky, maybe they were geniuses, but they had great timing, and then they didn't have great timing. And so we prefer things that are, if not counter-cyclical, at least not co-cyclical. So those three components really work on their own cycles and timelines. Climate is geologic in its cycle, but it also will go through ebbs and flows from a startup landscape.
And then how many investments do you guys typically make? What's your check size, stuff like that?
Yeah, so we have 115 plus companies that we've invested in over a decade. We're on our fourth core fund, and each fund typically has 30 companies in them. And we'll typically focus on seed and A, and we'll write checks in the $3 to $15 million range at that first point of entry. And
so these are lead checks, taking a board seat, high conviction. That's
typically what we do. So in something like 75% of our investments at the seed and A, we are taking a board seat. These are all, we're pretty thematically focused. So even within climate, right now, I'm very focused on baseload generation, this gridlock challenge, electric vehicles, and some aspects of agriculture. But that's a pretty tight cluster when you think about the richness of opportunity. And maybe we sprinkle in a little bit of carbon trading and carbon markets in there. But in healthcare,
those I've seen a few of those over the last few years. These carbon markets. What's your crystal ball on that? Is that going to take off and be a really big thing, or is that always going to be like this niche thing? Or
I'm sure you've read Ministry for the Future.
Not in a while, but yeah.
The Carboni coin that was conceptualized there really by somebody else, but he wrote about it, really got me focused on the fact that there's a lot of things in climate that are frustrating, like I would say direct air capture, frustratingly vexing and expensive and confusing, and yet we probably have no choice but to pursue them. I think carbon credits are this, it's not a necessary evil, but it's a necessary tool, but not sufficient to take on the entire challenge. And it's very, very difficult to make them work effectively, both for the planet, but even economically. So I have invested in two companies, Toucan and Senken, who are very focused on making this work. And then the other side of the coin, more on the carbon accounting and carbon management, with Sinai, who are really helping companies get a picture for where their carbon sits, but then what to do about it. Ultimately, a piece of that, what to do about it, is really focused on buying some, what I would say specifically buying carbon removal credits. So renewable energy credits and other things I think are going to manifest as not a great part of the solution, but carbon removal credits, I think, become a much more powerful tool in our tool chest.
Interesting. And then back to the agriculture part, I'd love to hear about what you're seeing there and some of the robotics, computer vision. I've seen some interesting manufacturing robotics or agricultural robotics where they're increasing yields and really making the farm much more efficient.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I am definitely a follower of a 0 to 1 kind of intent, at least at the seed and A stage. We are looking for things that are really taking a very different new approach to something that can bring a much greater sense of resiliency for a climate challenged future, and hopefully bring solutions to the problem at a 0 to 1 scale. So things that are helping us, say, pick strawberries faster or something is, while I think important and likely to happen, is probably not going to bring in capital from obvious ventures. Things that are, as an example, completely decarbonizing the nitrogen fertilizer cycle. I think that is very interesting.
It touches on a lot of your pillars.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We didn't invest in
one.
Pivot Bio, but Pivot would be a great example. Kula Bio, Nitricity. We haven't made a bet in any of these areas, but I think all of them are showing really interesting promise when it comes to decarbonizing what is a massively carbon intensive process. It also has really negative side effects in terms of biodiversity, in terms of water challenges, not just use, but runoff. And those are all areas that I think are going to find lots and lots of innovation in the next decade.
So I heard a tinge of, is that an anti-portfolio company for you then?
Could be. You know, you never know till you know. But yeah. Those are all companies that I hope succeed for sure.
Yeah. And then let's talk about like some of your favorite investments. What are 2 or 3 of your favorites over the years?
Hard to say, right? But I am super excited about the upcoming launch of the Lightship, the electric RV company. You know, they've already launched the company, but they're going to start shipping soon. And wow. I am first on the wait list for vehicles off the line. So that's going to be a lot of fun.
This is like a motorhome, like an RV.
It is. It's a trailer, like an Airstream, but like nothing you've ever seen. It has no diesel generators, no propane. It is electric everything and has HVAC systems. It has hot water that's electrically powered, induction cooktops, and a lot of solar on the roof. So when you park this thing, you can be self-sufficient forever, net of water.
Wow.
And that is really
Even
exciting.
That, you could probably, hook it up to a stream and do water filtration, and you just be off the grid for weeks or months, just living in this.
And when you park in your backyard, where most of us see this sort of eyesore of somebody's RV sitting in their driveway or backyard, instead, you can plug this into your house, and it can be an ADU and power your house because it's got so much solar on the roof. So that one is a lot of fun. The team is extraordinary, and I think we're going to really enjoy bringing that to the world. Synop, helping electric vehicles cool up their capabilities and give power back to the grid, I think is doing really, really well and resonating with people who have school bus fleets and truck fleets. In fact, Forum Mobility, another one of our portfolio companies, uses them. And Forum is electrifying port trucking, which I think is a tragically dirty industry because it's such an important part of the American supply chain, and yet it uses the dirtiest trucks on the road today because they tend to end of life 18-wheelers in drayage in the operations of getting things out of ports because they just do small trips. So if they break down, it's not as big a deal. That one I'm very excited about. We're launching a EV truck charging station at the end of this year at the Port of Long Beach in LA, and it will be 9 megawatts. It can charge hundreds of trucks a day, and that will really impact the local environment. There are a lot of those truckers live with their families around the ports, and the trucks that they are driving are really clogging the air, and you see a lot of much higher rate of cancer and asthma in children and other things in those regions. And it's really tragic because they're super important parts, contributors to the global economy. And yet we haven't given them the service of the privilege of clean air and water in the region.
Did you look at a company called Transformative? They're a EV locomotive startup.
Yes, I did. I've looked at, I think, 3 or 4 electric locomotive companies, and they are all really interesting. And those could be in an anti-portfolio at some point too. There's so much value you can bring to that industry when each individual car can move on its own.
Yeah.
I think that's a very exciting concept.
Yeah. Let's talk about board membership. So you, how many boards do you sit on, and do you recommend that to burgeoning VCs like me?
Yeah, I sit on, I have directorship and observer rights, which we here at Obvious, we just consider those sort of the same thing effectively from a time commitment standpoint. 9 boards today. I don't know what the right number is. I certainly know investors who are on more boards. It's very stage dependent. So, I was an observer on a board that was of a company that was going public, and that was quarterly board meetings, and I was not on committees. It was really easier in many ways versus 5-person startup that we would want to meet once a month because you are considered an adjunct member of the team.
Right.
And so I don't know if there's a magic formula. I do know that it's something I enjoy a lot. I think it is a real responsibility of early stage investors to play some sort of role, a governance role that, most of the time would be a board membership, but I think other times it can just be consigliere or figure out what you're good at, whether it's people management or partnerships or whatnot, and just be that resource to the founder.
Yeah, something I've struggled with, now that we have, over 100 portfolio companies. I'm not sitting on any boards yet. I've never been the biggest check in the round. I've never led a round. And it's, I've been asked to be on a couple boards, and I'm a solo GP, so I don't have a lot of time. But it's, maybe as I grow the team and become more mature and start reserving capital for follow-ons, maybe it's something I do consider in the future. I was just wondering, what are some pros and cons and benefits? And
I think the key is that companies take governance seriously. So maybe that's just something that you can filter for. Hey, is this company serious about governance? I think 4 or 5 years ago, particularly with Web3 companies or projects, things that were not even companies, there was a mindset that governance is anachronistic or something, like this is an old-fashioned thing that is not really needed. And that was, wildly irresponsible thinking.
Yeah.
I think it was
wishful thinking. Right? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it was wishful thinking on both parts. Yeah. Smart. Right. I think that was wishful thinking on both parties' parts. I think investors thought maybe I don't need to put in the reps here, and founders thought this is great. I can figure it all out on my own. And that did not end well. But in your case, I think, your objective should simply be making sure that you're partnered up with the right investors who are on the lead and who do take those governance positions, and that the governance exists. And if it doesn't, then you're probably set up for failure, because in a poorly governed board environment or subsequent financing, you could easily be steamrolled as the not present person. And I do think that is something that cyclically early stage sole GPs, particularly without follow-on dollars and without governance or information rights, are going to be susceptible to just being the one who's not really present, and therefore there'll be less of a connection, and therefore you could be taken advantage of. And I think that would be really
we'll raise another round, we'll have double lick prep, and I don't have a say in that.
Yeah, or a pay to play, where you just get
crammed down. Yeah, that's really interesting. Maybe you could describe what that pay to play cram down looks like for the audience that doesn't know what that is.
Yeah, I think typically when I think the kind way to put it is if it's deemed that the company can't raise additional capital, perhaps it was because the last round was mispriced, the company had too high a valuation. Therefore, there should be an inside round that maybe is at really punitive pricing to say, let's make up for lost time. But there are also certain investors who would say, look, I can't, or I just don't want to invest anymore. And at that point, some lead investors might say, okay, if you don't continue to invest, we will convert your shares to common shares, or give everyone else 5-to-1, 10-to-1 share ratios or warrants that will allow them to take on much greater ownership, and essentially subjugate your ownership to a lower spot in the cap in the liquidation preference, and then you will effectively no longer have valuable shares in the company.
Right.
And I think that practice is showing. I mean, it's very common practice in downturns. And I certainly saw it in the .com boom and bust. I saw it in the clean tech 1.0, and we're of course starting to see it a lot more often now.
Yeah, right. What is the mixing stone behind you on your shelf?
Yeah, we got all sorts of things. These are just like little statuettes.
Got the space shuttle there, and then
This is a vitamin company that we backed early on and sold to Unilever, and that's their version of a tombstone. And we have sort of a space theme here at Obvious.
What is that a mix? Is that just a piece of art, the stone up there, or is that a top shelf
up here? Yeah, that's just a piece of art.
Oh, okay. Yeah. It looks like kind of like something you grind, like flour.
It's not a mortar and pestle. Yeah, but it looks like one. Yeah.
Well, why don't we finish off with a quick rapid fire? That sounds good.
Go.
What's your favorite woodworking project you've ever completed?
I built so many. I built a boat that I really enjoyed, and I built a bed.
Boat you literally went out in water on?
Yeah, a boat. Wow. Beautiful. It's a little, very humble rowboat. Sadly, just lost in a storm recently, in really a climate-driven extreme storm, and it ripped it out of our boathouse and took it out to sea. So the Tinker is what it was called. Rest in peace. Lost at sea. And with one of my daughters, I made a bed that she sleeps in and will use as she goes off to college. And that was a really, really fun project.
That's really cool. What's a book that has significantly influenced your approach to business?
I mean, I'm a really big fan of science fiction. So Ministry for the Future, as mentioned earlier, it's funny. I thought I knew a lot about climate and I didn't really need yet another doom and gloom story. And I just loved that book. I loved the approach. Really opened my eyes to some of the likely scenarios. But I also am deeply moved by Isaac Asimov books, and the Foundation trilogy definitely continues to impact me as we think about artificial intelligence. And, he called them robots, but he really meant AI and artificial general intelligence and superintelligence, and those were valuable. And superintelligence, by the way, I think Nick Bostrom is a great book about the challenges of AI, as is Our Final Invention. I think both of those are important for people to read today.
I find I can't read sci-fi for some reason. I'm a big sci-fi fan. Grew up watching Star Trek, but I'm much more into the nonfiction, like the Nick Bostrom kind of books. I did just start the Culture series with Ian Banks. By Ian Banks. Elon Musk mentioned it in a podcast. I was like, I need to check that out. It's about a post-scarcity AI-based culture called The Culture.
Okay.
So kind of interesting. What's your go-to activity for relaxation?
Well, woodworking is a big one. I also love running, and I love cooking with my family. We do a lot of cooking together. And
that's cool.
Helpful.
That's really, cooking and eating together. Cathartic. I also see you a lot on the tonal. I forgot to mention that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we follow each other on the tonal exercise gym.
Yeah, big fan of the tonal.
Such a good machine.
Yeah, we passed on the seed. I think that was probably a good call, actually. Oh,
they're struggling now with low margins, low sales, or?
Yeah, I think I didn't believe in it because I didn't think it had cross-gender appeal in the way that a Peloton did. And there's some, as you know, there's some installation challenges with it. Yeah. But as a customer, I am very happy with it. Big fan.
I tell everybody. In fact, my friends are like, shut up about your tonal. Yeah. I'm like, that's so great. My wife loves it too. She literally stopped using the Peloton. We have the Peloton tread and the bike. And she just uses the tonal.
It should have appeal to men and women together. I think it's just the first. I think people think of it as this is just about like getting buff or ripped, and that's just doesn't have the same appeal for men and women together. But I think for everyone, I think it's a great device.
Yeah, and I think once women realize that weight training, all the benefits of it, and you lose, the stat is you lose like 1% of your muscle mass per year after 40, and so if you're not weight training, you're just withering away. And so, you gotta hit those weights.
Yeah.
What's the most challenging aspect of working in VC and venture capital?
Well, I think it's a really humbling profession. It's one of the most measurable jobs out there, and yet those measurements take many, many years to manifest. So I think being honest with yourself and with your partners, I think is critical, and really presents opportunities for continuous improvement on a daily basis. But I think one of the most challenging tactical components of the job is just saying no all day. I think most venture capitalists are pretty extroverted people, and if you want to be honest with yourself and honest with the amazing founders that you're trying to support, it takes a lot to I think.
And getting to a fast and honest no is the hardest part.
And one that maybe can be helpful for everybody involved. It's just really, it's an underappreciated piece of the job, and I think is hard.
Yeah. Have you ever said no to a founder and they convinced you to make an investment, either immediately or later? Or do you stick to your guns on your no?
No. Yeah, let me think about that.
Because I've certainly passed some stuff that later looked good.
Yeah.
Like 12 months, 18 months, 24 months later.
Sure. Of course, yes.
That happens all the time. But I'm talking about like somebody says no. I'm like a no. I don't like the market or the friction or whatever it is. And then you're like, and then they convince you. Yeah, me neither. I was just curious.
There have been cases where there are cases where I think we are going to come back and do like a later round.
Yeah.
So it's a not now, but later. In fact, I just had that conversation with the founder in like a pre-seed scenario, and I am very excited to lead the next round, but there are some sort of components that I want to see fall into place. And again, that's where, the directness, honesty, and openness, I think ultimately leads to a reputational value over time that should be helpful in those moments where you do jump back on.
Yeah. I mean, I'm in B2B SaaS, so I typically just tell founders, like, unless you have revenue, like, we shouldn't even talk because it's B2B SaaS. You should be able to go hack it together and get some revenue. What's the startup sector you're excited about, but you don't get to invest with obvious?
Well, something that I look at from a distance that I'm hopeful for is things that are geographically far afield. So we will not invest outside of really the US, a little bit of Canada, and then a little bit of Europe. But I think there's a lot of innovation happening in Africa right now. There's definitely innovation in LATAM. So those are areas geographically that I'm disappointed. I'm very happy with our strategy of not being there, but I do look at Pine a little bit for wanting to do stuff there.
That's interesting. And then last question, with all the AI, robotics coming down the pike, with what do you see as the impacts to the future of work and society? And do you think we're all just living on basic income in the future and doing podcasts, or what's your vision?
That's my last. I have 30 seconds to just
30 seconds to figure that out.
No, I mean, I think AI in particular, and I would just make a distinction, like robotics to me, I don't even really know what a robot is versus an automation machine. I think the software inherent in it is really what drives the magic that we think of as a robot. So I think AI really is deserving of much of the hype it's received in terms of its catalyst. I mean, I have kids in high school, and I've begged them to study philosophy and study, instead of coding and physics, study this question of what is reason, what is truth, what is honesty, what is reality. Those are super important questions, including, what is democracy, what is freedom, what is speech. These very, very basic questions, which we've spent literally like eons debating and discussing. I feel, at least in America, in the last 100 years or 50 years, 50 years, we have paid less attention to, and yet they will be central and core, as we're seeing manifest by Elon Musk on a daily basis on X, I think a lack of respect for the history that has, the groundwork that has already been laid to debate these questions. It would be great for everyone to study that a little bit more, because the AI will take care of a lot of the rest. And the ideal world would be us guiding it with some of those bumper rails of what's important to collective human consciousness.
That's really great advice. Thank you so much for coming on the program. I could have talked to you for another hour at least. I know you're super busy, so I appreciate you taking some time out of your day to wax philosophically on these topics.
A lot of fun, Brian. Thank you very much for having me.
Thanks so much.